My family checked my phone during dinner and saw everything. And I don't mean the harmless things they always accuse me of hiding, like music playlists and memes and harmless group chats with friends. I mean, they saw the parts of my life I had buried so deep, even I forgot where they were kept. The messages where I told my best friend I felt trapped in my own house, the late night voice notes where I cried about wanting to disappear, the screenshots of articles about emotional abuse, control, and psychological manipulation that I had been reading in secret, the contact name saved with a fake girlish name that belonged to the only person who had ever made me feel seen, the one someone they would call forbidden. And all of it happened so fast that even now it feels like something that happened to another person. Not me, like a scene from a movie where the room suddenly tilts and the music stops and the truth arrives uninvited to the table. It started as such an ordinary evening that the worst part is how normal it all felt. Like a trap disguised as routine. Steaming rice on the table, the clink of metal spoons against chipped ceramic plates, my youngest cousin playing with crumbs, my mother glaring at me to sit up straight, my father scrolling on his own phone in silence like the king of a very small, very dim kingdom, and me just trying to get through another hour without drawing attention to myself, without someone commenting on my weight or my posture or the way my shirt sat against my shoulders, without someone asking where I'd been that afternoon, and then my brother said it in the most casual, mocking tone possible. Why is your phone buzzing so much? And in that moment, my entire body went rigid because I realized I hadn't muted the notifications. I hadn't silenced the vibrations from the group chat that had been lighting up my phone like a distress signal, and as it buzzed again between my elbow and the table, as if on purpose, as if it could feel my fear, I saw my mother's eyes flick toward the device. Heavy with suspicion, that familiar suspicion that has lived behind her pupils for as long as I can remember. The one that says she doesn't see a daughter when she looks at me. She sees a potential threat, a puzzle, a problem that needs constant surveillance, and she reached for the phone without even asking, without even pretending it was normal behavior, just picked it up from next to my plate like it belonged to her, like it had always been hers, and for a split second I thought maybe she'd just place it somewhere else. Maybe she'd tell me to put it away, but she didn't. She tilted the screen toward herself, swiped it open, and the entire world inside it spilled out in front of my family like a confession written in light. My heart didn't just race, it screamed in my chest as I watched the messages pop up, long paragraphs I had written with shaking fingers at 2 a.m. when no one could hear me cry, jokes, half-hearted lulls that masked pain. Lines like, I don't feel safe here anymore, I think something is wrong with my family, and sometimes I imagine running and never looking back, and I saw it all reflect in her widened eyes first, then in my father. It was a hard stare as he stood up and leaned over to see the screen, and then my aunt, my cousin, even my grandmother squinted toward the glowing rectangle like it was a holy object revealing my sins. What is this? My mother whispered, not to me, but to the words themselves, as if they had reached out from the phone and slapped her across the face, as if the universe had betrayed her by letting her see the one thing she'd worked so hard to stop me from understanding. The truth. And she scrolled, her fingers trembling with anger as private thought after private thought passed under her eyes. The saved articles about controlling parents, the quotes highlighted in my notes app like prayers I was building for my escape, the conversation with my friend where I confessed, too honestly, they treat me like a prisoner, not a daughter, and the worst part, the absolute point of no return, was when she opened the chat with his name, the one I'd hidden under a fake girl's name with a pink heart emoji, the one I told myself she'd never figure out, because that was the only safe thing I had, a secret just for me, and suddenly the screen filled with words like, I wish I could take you away from there, one day we'll be free, just hold on a little longer, and my father slammed his hand down on the table so hard the plates rattled, and my grandmother jumped in her seat. And in that moment, there was no pretending, no polite rules left to follow, because this wasn't tea about curiosity. It wasn't about concern. It was about control being ripped out of their hands and shattered in front of them. And my mother finally looked up at me, phone clenched in her fist, her knuckles white with rage and betrayal and humiliation all twisted into one. And she said my name the way someone says a stranger's name when they find out who destroyed their life. And she said it so quietly, it was almost scarier than if she'd screamed, who is he? And the table might as well have fallen apart because I felt like the ground beneath me no longer existed, just a drop into something dark and endless. And I opened my mouth, but no sound came out because suddenly every lie I had practiced, every defense, every half-truth I'd prepared just vanished. And in that silence, my father spoke. Low, cold, dangerous, we did not raise you like this. And he didn't even say it like an accusation. He said it like a diagnosis, like there was a sickness in me that had finally revealed itself, and my aunt's hand flew to her chest. Astagfirullah, she's talking to boys in secret, my cousin gasped, while living under her father's roof. And all at once, the room erupted into a storm of voices, my mother crying out that she had sacrificed everything for me, my father shouting that I had brought shame into his house, My grandmother rocking and whispering prayers like someone was dying. And in a way, they were right, because the version of me they had built their expectations on was dying right there between the rice and the cracked glasses of water. And the strangest thing was, beneath the terror curling in my spine, beneath the sharp heat of humiliation climbing my face, there was also something else beginning to flicker. Relief, because it was finally out. Because the walls between my real thoughts and their fake version of me had shattered, and there was no duct tape in the world strong enough to put it back together. And my little sister stared at me, not with judgment, not with anger, but with something that looked dangerously close to admiration. And that look broke me way more than any screaming ever could, because it meant she saw the truth too, and she would remember this moment for the rest of her life. My mother shoved the phone toward my face as if it burned her hands. Explain, she demanded. Explain every single thing on this phone right now. And I stared at the glowing screen full of my own words, and I realized there was no explaining to people who refused to understand. People who thought a lack of freedom was love, a lack of privacy was protection, a lack of choice was tradition, and something deep inside of me, something that had been gathering strength every time I cried in silence, every time I swallowed my anger, or every time I forced myself to be good, suddenly stood up and said, enough. And without even planning it, without rehearsing it in the mirror like I'd done so many times with imaginary speeches, I whispered just loud enough for everyone to hear. You weren't supposed to see this, but it's all true. And the room went silent in the worst, heaviest way, the kind of silence that comes right before something explodes. And my father stared at me like he'd never seen me before, like I was a stranger wearing his daughter's face. And my mother's tears stopped mid-fall as realization crept into her expression. Realization that this wasn't TA phase, this wasn't TA misunderstanding, this wasn't me being influenced by friends or media, this was me waking up. And I watched that realization twist into fear on her face, because once a person wakes up, once a person sees the cage for what it is, they don't always go back quietly. And in that moment, with my phone still in her trembling hands and my whole humiliating inner world exposed to the people who raised me, I understood something terrifying and beautiful at the same time. This wasn't just about them finding out what was on my phone. This was the moment they realized they were losing control over me. And as much as they hated that, as much as they wanted to crush it, a part of me felt a strange sense of power rising from the wreckage, because they finally knew the truth. And the truth, once seen, can never be unseen. My father moved first, which made sense because in our house, he was always the one who decided whether a moment became a lecture, a punishment, or a silent grudge. And this time it was clearly going to be all three, stacked on top of each other like the layers of food congealing on our plates. And he reached across the table and took my phone from my mother with a grip so tight I wondered if he would snap it in half. And for a second, I almost wished he would, because then at least the evidence would be gone. But the problem was the evidence wasn't the messages or screenshots or contacts. The evidence was the look on my face, the way I hadn't denied anything, the way I said it is all true, and there is no way to smash that into pieces no matter how hard you slam your hand down. And he held the phone in front of him like it was a police report, his eyes scanning message after message, the tilt of his head changing as he moved from outrage to hurt to cold calculation. And he stopped on one text where I had written, "I feel like a prisoner here," and his jaw clenched, the vein in his temple pulsing, and he read it out loud, slowly, in our language, as if saying it with his own mouth would somehow turn it into a lie. "I feel like a prisoner here," he repeated, then looked up at me, his eyes dark. "This is how you speak about your home? This is what you say about your parents after everything we have done for you? We fed you, we clothed you, we protected you from the filth outside, and you describe us like jailers?" And there it was, the script I'd known was coming, the one every girl in those support groups had warned me about, the one that transforms your pain into their suffering, your fear into their wounded pride, and I knew if I wasn't careful, I'd drown in it and forget which feelings were actually mine. And my mother sniffed loudly, wiping her eyes with the edge of her scarf. "All this time we thought she was a good daughter," she said, while she was busy talking about us like enemies behind our backs. And my aunt nodded, shaking her head. This is what happens," she muttered, "letting girls have phones, no supervision, no filter," and I almost laughed, actually laughed, because the irony was so sharp it hurt. I had never been unsupervised. I had grown up with them reading my messages, checking my location, monitoring my clothes, questioning my friends, and the fact that these tiny slivers of privacy I had carved out for myself on an object that technically belonged to me were now being held up as proof of their generosity was almost comical in the most tragic way possible. And my father scrolled again, his eyes narrowing when he hit the part of the conversation where my friend had written, "This is abuse. You know that, right?" And I had replied, "I don't know, it's just my family. This is how they are." And seeing the word abuse in that chat, in that context, in this room was like dropping a lit match in a room soaked in gasoline. Because my father's face went from furious to something else, something that actually scared me more than shouting. "Who told you this?" he demanded, his voice low and deadly. "Who put this in your head?" And before I could answer, before I could explain that no one put it there, that it had been growing inside me for years like a quiet infection while I watched other families at school be normal, my mother cut in sharply. Those friends of hers, she spat, those Western girls, and probably that boy, she added, throwing the word boy like a curse across the table. They fill her head with poison, make her think she's above us, and she turned to me, pointing at the phone. You tell me right now, who is he? And there it was again, the part they cared about most, more than my feelings, more than the word abuse, more than my late night sobs or my fantasies of running away. What kept stabbing at their pride was that there might be a boy involved, that my emotions might be attached to someone outside the bloodline, that my need to escape might be tethered to some outsider. And the sad truth was, yes, there was a boy, but he wasn't the reason I wanted to escape. He was the reason I realized escape was even possible. That there were people who didn't talk to each other like this, who didn't weaponize love, who thought trust meant not needing to look through someone's phone to feel safe. But if I said any of that out loud, they wouldn't hear the nuance. They would only hear one unspeakable crime. I had given my attention, my vulnerability, to someone they hadn't approved, hadn't vetted, hadn't picked for me. And in our house, that might as well be a death sentence. So I took a deep breath, looked straight at my mother, and said, he is someone who listens. And the room sucked in a collective breath, like I'd sworn at them, like I'd just spat in their food. And my father slammed the phone onto the table this time, making everyone jump. You are not allowed to speak to him again, he said through gritted teeth, which made me want to laugh because the idea that those words could somehow reach into the network towers and cut the signal between us was so absurd. But I knew what he meant. Not just the physical act of texting, but the concept of that boy existing in my life, in my mind, in my heart, had to be erased for him to feel like he still had control. You will delete his number, delete this entire conversation, and from tomorrow, no phone, he declared, his voice rising. You have proven you cannot be trusted with it. And my mother nodded vigorously. We should have done this earlier, she said. We gave her too much freedom, and look what she did with it. And I felt something inside me fold inward at that word again. Freedom, because what they called freedom was a phone and a walk to school. What I called freedom was being able to breathe without permission, and we weren't speaking the same language, even when we used the same words. And my grandmother finally spoke, her voice small and shaky. Habibti, why you didn't come to us if you felt like this? She asked. We are your family, and there was something genuine in her eyes that softened me for a moment, because maybe she really didn't understand what it meant to live in this house under their rules. Maybe to her it looked like love and concern and tradition, but to me it was a constant evaluation, constant suspicion, constant fear of saying the wrong thing and triggering a week of silent treatments or slammed doors. And I said very softly, because when I try to tell you how I feel, you tell me I am a dramatic or ungrateful, or that I don't understand how the world works, or that other girls have it worse, or that I am embarrassing you. You never actually listen. And my father rolled his eyes. Listen to what? He snapped. To your childish complaints? To your desire to live like these girls you see on TV, drinking, sleeping around, disrespecting their parents? We are trying to keep you safe, and this is how you repay us? And I realized then that in their minds, every boundary is rebellion. Every request for privacy is a step toward disgrace, and there is no version of me that can be both honest and good at the same time. And that thought both crushed and freed me, because if they were going to see me as a problem no matter what, maybe I could stop twisting myself into knots trying to look like the solution. And my mother stood up abruptly now, the legs of her chair scraping loudly. Enough talking, she said, the hostess mask sliding away completely. From now on, new rules, and she began to list them like she'd been keeping them in her pocket for this exact moment. No more sleepovers, no more staying after school, straight home. You will not go anywhere without one of us. You will give us your phone, your laptop, your passwords. You will sit in the living room to study, not in your room, and you will stop complaining about privacy like you're some American teenager on TV. This is not their house. This is our house, and you will live by our values, or you can leave. And that last part hung there again. You can leave, and for years I had believed that as an empty threat, because where would I go? How would I pay for anything? How would I survive? But now, in the middle of that suffocating room with my phone glowing like a spotlight on my sin, the idea of leaving started to feel less like a nightmare and more like a map, blurry and incomplete, but a map nonetheless. And I remembered what Lena had told me at group. Sometimes the worst thing they threaten you with is the exact thing that saves your life. And I had nodded back then like I understood, but now I finally did, and I realized I had a choice, not an easy one, not a painless one, but a choice nonetheless. I could agree to their rules, hand over my devices, sever my connections to the outside world, and spend the next however many years slowly shrinking myself into the version of their daughter they could tolerate, or I could do the unthinkable and step outside their approval completely. And when I thought about the first option, really thought about it, my chest tightened so hard I had to grip the edge of the table to stay upright, because I could already see that version of me, eyes dim, Laughter forced, a ghost living in the house they built, and when I thought about the second option, my whole body tensed with fear, but there was also a strange spark of something else possibility. And that spark scared me almost as much as my father's anger because it meant my survival instinct wasn't anchored to this house anymore. It was looking for exits. My mother reached for my phone again, this time with decision. Give it, she ordered, as if the conversation was over, as if my role now was to surrender and say thank you for the punishment. And I looked at the device, at the cracked edges of the cheap case, at the fingerprints and smudges, at the tiny icon still lit from the last unread message from him that she hadn't opened yet. And I knew if I gave it to her, it would be more than handing over plastic and metal. It would be stepping back into the smaller version of myself they were trying to stuff me into, and I heard my own voice say, "No," before my brain caught up, just that one syllable. Tiny but loud, and the whole room vibrated with it, like I'd dropped a bomb made of letters and my father's head snapped toward me. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet, and my hands were shaking now, but I didn't look away. I said no, I repeated, and my mother laughed in disbelief, a sharp, humorless sound. "You don't have the right to say no to us," she said. "Everything you have is because of us," and I nodded slowly, my heart pounding. "That is true," I said. "You gave me a home and food and clothes and all of that. But my mind, my thoughts, my feelings, those are mine, and so is this phone. I bought it with my own money, and it was true. I had saved months from my tutoring job, convinced them to let me pay for it so they wouldn't have to, thinking it would buy me a few millimeters more autonomy. And now those millimeters were stretching into miles, and my father stepped around the table now, coming to stand directly in front of me, and I could feel the heat of his anger radiating off his skin. "If you live in my house, nothing is just yours," he said. Donna, forget that. And maybe a year ago I would have lowered my eyes and apologized, but now all I could think was, I don't want to live in your house forever. And before the fear could clamp down on my throat again, I said, "Then maybe I shouldn't live in your house." And there it was. The words that no one says, not out loud, not with the door still closed and dinner still on the table. The words that usually only appear in threats and nightmares and whispered gossip about that girl who ran away, and my mother's hand flew to her mouth. "You would leave your family?" she whispered, like I'd suggested committing a war crime. "For what? For a boy? For your so-called freedom? For strangers who don't care if you live or die?" And I thought about the boy who had told me he'd help me find a place if I ever needed it, about Lena and the group members who shared resources for shelters and legal aid in a quiet back room on campus, about the professor who had once pulled me aside after class and said gently, "If you ever need to talk about anything, my door is open." And I realized that maybe they weren't strangers in the way she meant. They were people who had seen parts of me my family refused to acknowledge existed, and that kind of seeing mattered, and I swallowed hard, feeling my knees go weak. "I would leave," I said softly but clearly for myself, and the silence after that was like standing at the edge of a cliff. Wind roaring, ground far below, no guarantee of a safe landing, just the knowledge that staying where I was meant slowly dying in place. And in that silence, my little sister finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Baba, please," she whispered. "Maybe we should listen to her." And we all turned to look at her, this tiny girl with fear in her eyes and bravery in her voice. And for a second, my father looked genuinely stunned, like he'd just noticed she had thoughts too, like he hadn't considered that anything happening to me would echo into her. And my mother snapped, "Go to your room at her," but she shook her head, tears spilling over now. "No," she cried, the word echoing mine. "You always do this. You always shout and decide, and you never ask us what we feel. I hate it. I hate when you look through our stuff and act like we were criminals. I hate that she's always sad and you don't even see it." And then she burst into full sobs, covering her face with her hands. And in that moment, the truth wasn't just coming from me. The corrupted one, the bad influence, it was coming from the child they still believed they had full control over. And I saw something crack in my grandmother's expression, something like guilt, maybe, or regret. And she murmured, "Ya Allah," under her breath in a different tone now, not the performative wail of a reputation under attack, but the quiet plea of someone realizing maybe they'd been wrong about something important for a very long time. And the room felt tilted, the power shifting by millimeters as my father stared at his two daughters, one standing, one crying, both refusing to follow the script. And I knew we weren't going to win everything in that moment. This wasn't TT a movie. He wasn't going to suddenly apologize and hand us back our phones and promise to respect our boundaries. But something irreversible had happened, and everyone knew it. And he must have felt it too, because instead of grabbing my phone or slapping it out of my hand like I half expected, he took a step back, jaw tight, and said through his teeth, "We will talk about this later," then turned and walked out of the room, his footsteps heavy down the hallway, the door to his bedroom slamming shut a second later. And my mother stood there shaking, torn between chasing after him and lashing out at me, and in the end she chose both, pointing a trembling finger at me as she backed away. "You are breaking this family," she hissed. "Remember that when you are alone." And then she followed him, leaving me in the middle of the dining room with the detritus of dinner around me and my grandmother whispering prayers under her breath and my aunt staring at me like I was either a demon or a prophet. She hadn't decided yet, and my cousin pretending to scroll his phone while very clearly listening to everything, and my little sister wiping her eyes furiously. And in that strange, suspended moment, I did something very small that felt very big. I picked up my phone, locked it, put it in my pocket, and walked to my room without asking permission, without explaining, without apologizing. And when I closed the door behind me and slid my back down it, heart still pounding, the house felt different. Less like an unchangeable universe and more like a place I might one day leave. That night, I didn't sleep much, my mind running circles around what had happened, around what might happen next, around whether my father would actually kick me out, whether my mother would try to take my devices while I slept, whether my sister would get punished for speaking up, and sometime around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed with a message from an unsaved number that I recognized instantly. Lena gave me your number. This is the campus counselor, she mentioned. It read, she told me a bit about what happened tonight. So sorry you're going through this. If and when you're ready, we can talk confidentially about your options, practical options, not just emotional support. You're not trapped, even if it feels like it. And I stared at that message for a long time, feeling the weight of it, the validation that what had happened at dinner wasn't just strict parenting or culture or normal, but something serious enough that there were people whose actual job was to help girls like me navigate it. And I didn't reply right away, my fingers hovering over the keyboard because taking that step felt like crossing another invisible line. But I saved the number, labeled it something boring and unremarkable, and then opened my chat with the boy my mother had seen, the one who'd been blowing up my phone earlier before going quiet when he realized something was wrong. And I wrote, they went through my phone at dinner. They saw everything. It was bad. But I am still here. And a moment later, he replied, I am so sorry. Are you safe right now? And I looked around my room at the door, at the window, at the shadows on the ceiling, and thought about what safe meant. Because physically, yes, I was home, in my bed under a blanket that smelled like the detergent my mother liked, but emotionally, psychologically, I was on a fault line that could shift at any second. And yet, for the first time, I also had something they couldn't see or touch, a network of people outside these walls. Proof on my own phone that my version of events mattered, that my feelings weren't imaginary, that my desire for privacy wasn't rebellion but a basic human need. And I wrote back, not exactly, but safer than before, I think. They finally know who I am, even if they hate it. And he replied, I am proud of you. Whatever you choose next, I'll support you. Even if that S just listening, and I realized that the screen that had just betrayed me at dinner was also the thing connecting me to possible escape routes, to empathy, to information my parents couldn't censor. And that contradiction was going to be my reality for a while. Maybe a long while, living in a house that thought it owned me while quietly planning for a future where it didn't tee up. My family checked my phone during dinner and saw everything. They saw my fear, my anger, my hope, my secret plans, my heart. But what they didn't realize, what they still don't to fully understand, is that once you see everything, you can attain unsee it. And that goes for me too. I had seen the truth of who they were when their control was threatened, and I had seen the truth of who I was when I finally said no, and there is no going back from that. No matter how many rules they write, how many tears they cry, how many times they say, we did this for your own good. That night was a breaking point, but it was also a beginning, the start of a slow, careful unraveling of the version of myself they had stitched together for years, and the beginning of the version I was going to build with my own hands, my own words, my own choices, one boundary, one phone call, one tiny act of defiance at a time.